Charlotte Markey, who, Charlotte, I'm going to be really bad now. Your job title?
Green Urbanisation Manager for Polypipe.
There we go. Round of applause, please.
Right, is it on? Do I need to press the button?
No, you're just talking to it.
Hello, yeah, good, it is on. I'm going to stand on this because it suits my sense of self-importance. Nice to see you this afternoon. Yeah, it's been really interesting. Charlotte and I have caught up through Giles, and we found out a lot about what our businesses do and the sort of the places that we can cross over. And one of the things that we talk about a lot in the sustainability space is that collaboration is absolutely key. So it's been a really good opportunity for us to practice what we preach and sort of find out. And I think it's the start of something beautiful, isn't it, potentially? We've got some good ideas. So starting at the beginning, I'm going to rattle through sort of what the problem is and sustainable drainage as a concept, as a solution. Then we're going to talk through our sort of specific solutions. Charlotte's going to talk about Polypipe's approach, I'll talk about ours, and hopefully we'll find out how that might cross over in the middle. Starting right at the beginning though, we know that climate change is causing extreme flooding events. I don't need to look at that, there's a sign at the back there, that's handy. That's down the road from our head office in Brighouse. Brighouse never used to flood, but about 4 years ago, we saw that flood event. We went out and took a photograph, and it's flooded about 3 times since. So there's no, we can't pretend that things aren't changing. We can't pretend that weather patterns aren't changing. There's a lot we can do to mitigate climate change, but the important thing is we've got to adapt, and we've got to adapt quickly. We've got to adapt the way we design and build urban spaces to do away with these events. There's 2 reasons why we're seeing more flooding. First of all, it's raining more frequently. It's raining harder and it's raining for longer periods of time. So whatever your beliefs, whether you choose to sort of follow the science or not, you can't deny that weather patterns are definitely changing. The other thing that's going on is that we're changing the way we manage land. So previously, when rain fell on open green land, most of it soaked down into the ground, and a little bit would flow away into waterways, where it would be channeled away into the sea or into a receiving watercourse, and that was fine. That worked fine for years. But then companies like Marshall's came along and concreted over that beautiful green landscape, and that stopped the water soaking down into the ground. So the majority of the water now is prevented from soaking down and instead flows at high speeds and in large volumes into the receiving watercourses, whether that's a sewer or a river or a stream or a tributary or whatever. So those 2 things, those 2 factors together mean that we've got a problem. That's why we're seeing more flooding going on. So sustainable drainage systems, or SuDS, the term was coined in the late 90s, I think, ish, and it's cottoned on. Yeah, it's cottoned on, and it's now become quite a radical movement. It's not a new thing though, and this is the key thing that we're keen to get across. Sustainable SuDS aren't new. It's not there be dragons. They've been around for about a quarter of a century. What are they? Years ago, we managed water by channeling it away from infrastructure. So that's basically what the Romans did. When water was coming down a hill towards them, they'd dig a channel, dig a route, and they'd get rid of the volume of water and channel it away somewhere else. That did its job. So drainage was always about getting rid of a large volume of water. They never really thought about the quality of the water that they got rid of. They rarely thought about amenity or biodiversity. It wasn't part of the philosophy. It wasn't part of the principles of drainage. The whole idea was about getting rid of as much water as possible, as quickly as possible, to protect your infrastructure. A good sustainable drainage system, though, can do so much more than that. So when it was launched, there was the SuDS triangle, wasn't there? The 3 elements that you had to balance. That's become more complicated now. Okay, there's the 4 pillars of SuDS. People are trying to put new sort of things in all the time. The key point is that you have to balance all 4 factors to make an effective sustainable drainage system. It's not just it's not just about the volume of water. It's not just about one thing. So it's about balancing quantity, quality, and then adding in biodiversity and amenity. We have to, dealing with the volume of water, dealing with the quantity is absolutely key. So we can't forget about that in all the stuff that we're going to talk about now. If it doesn't manage the volume of water, it's failed. if it doesn't get rid of the water, if it doesn't protect your infrastructure, then it's failed as a system. But what a good sustainable system should also do is improve the quality of the water that flows off as well, because we've got a big issue with, there are more cars on the road, so there's more pollutants. We've got a big issue with water quality as that goes thundering down into the sewers, carrying all the surface water runoff as well. So a good sustainable system will manage improve water quality as well. The two aspects at the bottom, though, a fairly new concept. A good system can actually provide amenity benefits. It can actually provide a nice place for people to hang out in. It provides a nice sort of community space that kids can play in and people can sit and relax in. That's something that a channel and a pipe can't do. And finally, as is getting more and more important with all building standards, it needs to provide biodiversity benefits. It needs to provide a space for flora and fauna to flourish in for all the benefits it brings. I'm not going to talk about biodiversity net gain here. That's a separate topic in itself. But introducing more green infrastructure to spaces is going to improve, as well as managing surface water. It provides air quality benefit. It improves air quality. It provides biodiversity habitats for animals and insects to live in. It improves mental health. There are so many multiple benefits from introducing green infrastructure. It's essential that we balance that while we're considering all the other things that a drainage system should do as well. While we're talking about that, something that we came up with through conversations over the past sort of 10 or 15 years was that there are loads of different ways to manage water. There are loads of different tools, loads of different philosophies, loads of different products, and all of them have their place. So as a SuDS purist, and I'm sure Charlotte would say the same, as a SuDS purist, you want to manage water on the surface, as near to the surface as you can, using soft landscaping, but that's not going to manage everything we need. So what we came up with was the idea that you can use all the techniques, all the products, all the systems, as long as they're appropriate and as long as you've considered them in the right order. So you start with natural flood management, which happens way before we get involved or you guys get involved. That's stuff like just putting logs and trees and twigs across streams up on the side of valleys. It's something you do with your kids at the weekend, and it slows the flow of the water down the side of the valley, so it means by the time it gets to the urban catchment, it's been slowed down and it's been spread out, so it allows to infiltrate and it's not going at high speed. Then you want to consider soft SuDS, the features that I talked about before, things like attenuation ponds. Which ponds, right? They're just big pools of water, they store water, the water soaks down over time. Rills, swales, just sort of landscaped solutions that collect the water and then allow the water to slow its flow through your catchment, infiltrating all the time and picking up all those water quality benefits as well. When you've used up all those opportunities, look at engineered SuDS. So this is where Charlotte and I, or this is where Polypipe and Marshalls come in. Things like permeable paving, things like the green infrastructure solutions that Charlotte will be talking about shortly. And there's absolutely a place, we say positive drainage, but there's absolutely a place for things like channels and gully pots and all. In an urban space, you need that kind of positive drainage to get water safely and quickly away from the space. Underground attenuation is absolutely necessary as well. We're talking about big underground tanks and pipes. Polypipe have, a big part of their offer is crates. A big part of what we do as well is underground tanks and pipes. The point is, you don't go for that option first. Start at the left-hand side of that graph, move your way down, and before long, you're probably going to end up at the point where you need underground, big sort of heavy-duty storage. Certainly with the deluges that we're going to see coming. And there's even a place for flood protection, just building a big wall to stop the flood water coming. All of those are legitimate, sensible approaches to water management. Just think about them in the right order and use them in the right way. What's interesting for us is that's the area that we operate in. We don't sell grass and we don't sell trees, but what we're finding is that legislation and sort of more awareness is driving people back up that hierarchy, driving people to consider soft SuDS first. So the challenge for us as manufacturers is to come up with products and systems that make it easy for people to install those features. And the challenge for designers and installers is to think straight away about how they can cram as much green space into their into their developments as they can. And that's not just for drainage purposes. That's for all the other legislation, the biodiversity net gain, the nutrient neutrality legislation that's in place in some areas as well. So that's as much as I wanted to talk about to start off. I'm going to hand over to Charlotte now, who's going to talk about Polypipe's approach and how we potentially work together on stuff.
Thanks, Chris. So hi guys, I think what Chris said was absolutely right in that we have to think about that, the way that the source control SuDS and shallow systems work with deep systems and how that green infrastructure as well as engineering works together. And I was working with a colleague of mine at Polypipe when the new sewer sector guidance came out, and Chris and I were talking about this because one of the things that you guys will see as a merchant is that the legislative changes that take place really do, as Chris said, drive people back up that graph towards the left, towards the more soft systems. And what we're finding now is that water companies are actually, and planning authorities are telling developers, we don't just want deep crates and pipes as a first point of departure. We want you to consider how you could think about tree pits, how you could think about swales and other green infrastructure assets as adoptable forms of a sewer. So actually the definition of a sewer itself has now changed to incorporate green infrastructure, which has caused a heck of a lot of confusion with the water companies because they're coming to us and they're saying, well, what does that mean in terms of how can a tree pit convey water? How can a tree pit manage water? This is all weird and wonderful to us. And as a merchant, if you've got this knowledge and you've got the product ranges from Marshalls and Polypipes to be able to facilitate that, you've really got a USP because they're going to be coming to you to ask you how this all works. And what you might see on a development, which is a really good change, and it's not necessarily a problem, is that you'll have a mix of what we call adoptable and non-adoptable features. So adoptable meaning that the water company will happily take on the maintenance and the management of that asset post the sale of that plot and everything going through. So tree pit, a swale, basins and ponds, soakaways, what Chris and I were talking about with crates and pipes, they're all perfectly adoptable. But you might find in the near future that lower cost systems for example, putting vegetated roofs on top of a garage or indeed green and blue roofs will actually be something that a lot more developers are exploring. I've had a lot of developer clients coming to us talking about new builds that will automatically have green and blue roofs on to store water or for added, as Chris was talking about, biodiversity net gain. So there's going to be a range of green infrastructure assets or new developments with a range of requirements in terms of products, solutions, services, all of which can and should manage water. So these are just a few things that guidance change has actually precipitated as this more creative response to managing water. And we're seeing this in the designs that are coming forward from engineers. And again, the Environment Bill, the move towards net zero, and there's even new talk particularly in central government, around what they're calling water neutrality now. So the idea that every development should be water neutral. It shouldn't be adding any more water to the combined sewer network than when it began. And this is all a huge, huge pressure for viability, because if you're a developer, you've only got a finite amount of space to pull all this off. And this is where you guys come in, because if you can optimize those green assets through engineered solutions beneath them, to support those green assets and that can also manage water, if you've got multifunctional ways to do this, you're really cooking with gas, because you can offer that full range of solutions that will save space, time and money. So this is a really good area of the market to exploit if you get it right. So what's adoptable? Swales and rills, we'll go through that in a minute, bioretention systems and trees, and as Chris was saying, soakaways and ponds and wetlands. So we do a lot of work on this, and Marshalls as well do a lot of work on these kind of approaches, where we're not just doing the soft SuDS as we described at the very left of the spectrum, because we can't always do that. There might be a reason why we need to put more water storage under a green space. For example, if you've got a small compact development, if you've got an urban site we often find that actually to manage the volume of water we need to on a particular plot of land, we need to be giving you more water storage. So this is where we bring in the green and the blue together. And this is where you as a merchant can talk to the developer about the kind of systems that could be used to make this happen. And we're not there yet. I'm not going to lie. We don't see this collaboration all the time because it's quite a technical sell. As you can see, you know, there's a lot of design work involved. Ordinarily, there's a lot of technical expertise required. But there's no reason, when Chris and I were talking, that this couldn't become more off the shelf. Especially on residential developments, there's no reason why these can't be packaged up and made more accessible for developers. And there's a lot of time and money and a bit of wasted energy, actually, where people go around the houses trying to integrate trees and SuDS on a site, where really if they just had a simple, accessible package solution, some of the things I'm showing you here, with just a few product ranges that you guys could offer, Marshalls and Polypipe are well able to facilitate these kind of things. It's very simple to enhance and optimize green assets on a development. So by using something like our Permavoid or our Polystorm crates, we've acquired other businesses within the Polypipe family for more of an extended product and suite of solutions. You can actually cater to developers with a variety of budgets as well, because what we don't want to do is price people out of greening their developments. And I think that's a real barrier sometimes, particularly in things like Tree Pit World. Chris has probably experienced this as well. You know, developers, they're not anti-greening, but they're just anti the headache, the time, the money that they perceive these things to take. So we've got to make it easier, simpler, and pain-free. And indeed, treatment and removal of pollutants is becoming a huge issue, and it's really expensive. So we've got to look for cheaper ways to create green assets that can also manage things like phosphorus. That's a huge issue that you guys are going to come across even more now. And I think Marshalls and Polypipe working together for how we can create kind of integrated approaches to getting phosphorus off a site and making that cheaper is going to be a really good way forward. I don't really want to talk about pipes today. It's in there, but I mean, please forgive me. My colleague Sue Illman and I were looking at the Polypipe website yesterday, and she was like, it's all about the pipes, come on. And I said, we are under construction on the website, but we do more than pipes. But they are necessary. So despite my personal aversion to talking about pipes today, we do have to get water from A to B, and there are times where between green assets and between SuDS features, we're going to need some pipe, whether it's Marshalls or Polypipe, you know, we're going to need it. So on any development, you guys will be able to package this up so that you've got your conventional suite of solutions and your more creative green infrastructure assets. So the developer has got you as a one-stop shop to go green and to also use those conventional methods, whereas Chris said, the reality is you might have some tree pits, some SuDS, then you're going to have to move that and convey through pipes, and then you're going to have a soak away, some deep attenuation tanks and some treatment. So you're going to sell that holistic approach as well as slowing the flow. You know, we're not beavers. We're not going to be able to just put a load of twigs somewhere and slow the flow on a development site. We're going to have to slow it through some other means. You know, we can do some natural flood management upstream, but in reality, there's going to be times where flow control and those kind of interventions are necessary. So again, it's about understanding that range of solutions. And I definitely recommend you guys, if you haven't, and this probably sounds like really, really boring homework, have a look at the Syria guide for the construction of SuDS. It's not bedtime reading, but it's a really good point of departure to kind of understand where developers are coming from, where the designers are coming from, and all the SuDS features are covered, from tree pits to swales to bioretention to basic tanks. And I just wanted to show this here as well, because Part C of the new sewer sector guidance actually talks about how these adoptable, non-adoptable green features come together. So as Chris was saying, you know, there's a time and a place for everything, and permeable paving is in there, swales are in there, storage tanks. And what we discovered from chatting together is that there are lots of ways that Marshall's products and Polypipe Permavoid systems can create the ultimate storage beneath Marshall's permeable paving. You know, there's no reason why you can't optimise that permeable paving offer, and there's no reason why you can't mash up the two product families. These things are compatible, and you should exploit the people supplying you to make the best of what you can offer. And this goes for how you mix up all these features. So you might well be able to sell some attenuation crates. You could use other geocellular to create an enhanced swale feature, and you can also use geocellular for things like permeable paving and tree pits. And for us at Polypipe, we use a number of these geocellular options to do all this. And that's not to mention also the importance of rainwater harvesting, which actually we didn't talk that much about. But
it's because we don't know a lot about it.
And, you know, again, rainwater harvesting is something that we're getting asked increasingly a lot about. And also the evolution of smart as well. That's another thing I wanted to signpost, because we're moving towards a world now where IoT and tech solutions, in the Netherlands, for example, even basic domestic sort of garden centres and companies sell smart systems for people to manage water in their greenhouses and automate a lot of services and make them lower maintenance. I think there will be a time in the future, and Chris is talking about how we mess around with things like the triangle of SuDS, the 4 pillars of SuDS. I think added on to this idea of quantity, quality, amenity and biodiversity, the 5th pillar will definitely be smart in the future. Because just like you can turn on your heating when you're away from home, you might even be able to manage your water and your irrigation and your SuDS features remotely in the future, which we're doing on green and blue roofs, which we're doing at a local authority level through tree pit systems. They're alerting local authorities when their tree pits are dry or when their green assets are failing. And this is something that developers and management companies will be really exploiting, especially if they've got 2 or 3 years worth of obligation to keep them looking good after they've handed them over. So in terms of long-term management, there's a lot of things that are really happening. And not to mention the importance of passive irrigation, which is something that you could easily also sell as a merchant, which is the use of capillary cones within geocellular systems to enable us to wick the water back up towards the green asset and store it, so that we even out those periods where we've got too much water and not enough, so that we're not just constantly using mains water to keep things looking good. So it's much more sustainable than sort of business as usual. But it's not limited to those kind of approaches. And as I said, consider all those enhanced added benefits. And Chris was saying, you know, think about the amenity, the placemaking, the reducing the pull on utilities and resources, and rainwater reuse and passive irrigation. And I don't really want to go through the sort of whole plethora of the product range, but these things all work together. And do ask us about it, and we will do training. And Marshall's probably the same. You know, we will always, our door is always open to kind of add on to what you're hearing today. And they're simple modular solutions. You know, this is just an example of our permavoid system with passive irrigation. And this does so much for a developer if they know how to use it. And if you guys are enabled to explain to them how it could be used under a green asset, for example, a tree pit or in a rain garden, then the possibilities for them really open up, as well as, you know, working on a scheme, even with permeable paving as an example. You know, often you might use an aggregate underneath permeable paving. Let's be more sustainable. Let's consider using something like a permavoid unit. Let's make it cheaper and easier for the developer to bring product to site, reduce labour costs, and think about all those added benefits of how we mix and match products. And not to mention the fact we can reduce loading when we use more structural, modular, enhanced solutions. And make use of our design guide. We've got a really good design guide that's downloadable, and it'll show you how you design with all these SuDS features. So without sort of going through it all today with you, I'll send Giles a link to that design guide. You can all make use of that and ask us any questions. But it just shows how these products can be packaged to create these kind of off-the-shelf solutions to give people what they need. And technical details, you know, we can help you guys detail up these kind of packages. This does look a little bit scary when you first look at it. It did me when I first joined Polypipe. But actually, they're really simple ways to integrate geocellular with a Marshall's permeable paving, for example, or some channel drainage. As Chris was saying, in reality, we'll be using 3 or 4 different products or 3 or 4 different techniques in one package solution when we're doing SuDS. And it's really simple. Just pick up the phone to us. We can guide you through it, and we can tell you how to package all that up together. And, you know, the big one for me, being the green urbanisation person, always being called the tree lady in the office, if you're going to go green, and developers, you know, they always name their roads on a new development like Sycamore Drive or Maple Avenue or something, and in reality the trees just look dreadful. And why is that? It's because they don't do it properly, and they try and get away with as little as possible, and it's not their fault, they're just being priced out of it. So my mission is to get tree pit packages into you guys that will be off the shelf, much cheaper, much easier for developers to get volume trees onto a site that can also manage some stormwater and surface runoff. And, importantly, are structurally sound enough not to buckle under a highway and to annoy the highways engineers so they won't adopt them. These are the challenges of doing proper green engineered SuDS solutions. So this is what we're here for. This is what Marshalls are here for, is to make this easier. And we could also get to a point where we start actually, you know, getting you guys to give good advice on the soil as well. You know, soil's a big part of this. SuDS without soil is a bit of a dud. You know, the soil is a huge part of it. The specification, the porosity, how water moves through the ground from start to finish is critical. And we need soil volume if we're going to create these decent green assets for the future. And again, you know, you can design 2 SuDS features at once. You don't just have a rain garden, for example. You can put some trees in your rain garden if you've got the right products. You can mix up all these features. And it's really modular and really simple. This is just a rain garden scheme in a residential area. As you can see from the below image, you're just disconnecting your downpipe from your residential dwelling into a bioretention feature that will store water and also allow infiltration. So it's not rocket science, it's just how you package it up. And I'm going to hand back to Chris to talk more about permeable paving as well.
Well, that's bang on time as well. It's almost like we rehearsed it. Just to pick up a point about smart water systems, one of the things that we're preoccupied with at the moment is that another consequence of climate change is the urban heat island effect. We're going to get really hot, really uncomfortable sort of urban spaces in 10, 15, 20 years' time. One of the solutions is green infrastructure, right? So that's another reason for putting more trees and more green infrastructure in. But another one is open water. So if you've got a large expanse of, you know, a large pond or, you know, some open water system, it instantly makes people, there's a psychological effect. You instantly feel 1.5 degrees cooler when you see open water. But it also actually, you know, the evapotranspiration effect actually, you know, cools the area down as well. If you ever want to go to Bradford, which is just down the road from us, the Centenary Square in the middle of the city is just like a slightly contoured sort of paved area. But when it's hot, they pump water into it, and it's amazing. You know, from a sort of place-making point of view, from a sort of, you know, kids come out and play in it, families come out and mess around in it, and it feels cool. So it's a really, you know, it's a really practical sort of system. So the idea of having a smart water system that holds onto rainwater when it can provide an asset, but releases it when we know there's a storm coming and we know we need the storage. That kind of smart water system is, you know, is something that I think we need to look into a little more. I think another point that I picked up on, a lot of the details and a lot of those concepts that we've been looking at now, they might look really complicated because there's loads of different sort of circumstances, loads of different applications, but ultimately it's only about 6 different components, isn't it? So it's, from your point of view, in terms of sort of stock holding or whatever, you know, there's only 6 parts to that Lego kit, but you can make so much with it. And it's the same with permeable paving, and that's what I'm going to bore you to death about. This is what I've been clattering on about for the past 10 years. So if you have got any questions later, I'd be more than happy to talk to you about it, but I can't say I'd recommend it. Let's see if this works. It might. Yes, this is our sort of Marks and Spencer's advert, sort of slow motion, high definition, super sensuous. data from here. For 4 years. They'd not really done any maintenance on it. And it disappears. So it's a brilliant source control method. Basically, you're not going to get a rainfall event like that, even not in this country. But basically, when you get a heavy rainfall event, what happens is the rainwater soaks down the gaps between the blocks, and that's the crucial thing to get across. If you're not aware of it, we've got some animations now. I think it's starting automatically. The crucial thing to get across is that it's just the same as a normal pavement. So as far as an engineer or an installer is concerned, the blocks are made out of concrete, just the same concrete as all of our other standard block paving. The difference is they've got special nibs on the edge, and the nibs sort of keep the blocks away from each other, so you get wider joints between them, and then you lay the, sorry, Giles, and you lay the blocks on a different subbase than you would a normal pavement. But the principles are exactly the same. Normally, you'd put MOT type 1, you put sand, and then you put concrete blocks on top. With this, you put in large rocks, large open-graded crush rocks, then you put in smaller open-graded crush rocks, and then you put in blocks on top. So what happens effectively is the water soaks down between the gaps, it sits in the subbase, where it can do one or two things. In this example, a type A system, it'll soak down into the ground at source. And that's the ideal, because it's dead straightforward. Then it's source control, you've not got any ponding, you don't have to worry about channels or drains. Basically, wherever the rain falls, it's just going to soak down into the ground, and then you've got a zero discharge part of that development. About 50% of our designs are type A systems, where the water soaks into the ground. Alternatively, you've got a type C system, because you might have contaminated ground, or you might have a lot of contaminants potentially on the surface that they don't want leaching into the ground below. So what you do there is you put this membrane, an impermeable membrane, around the bottom of the tank. You're effectively creating a basin, so the water sits in that, and then it's channeled away at a controlled rate. So it's not soaking down, so we're using the pipes again, which obviously, we're not dead excited about pipes, but they're a useful tool to have in your armoury. So you'd have a perforated pipe at the bottom of that system, and that means that you can direct the water where you want it to go at a rate you need it to go at. And the other point is that we know through some work that we did with Coventry University about 6 years ago, that the water that comes through the system is already being cleansed, because there's a mechanical and biological filtration process that goes on throughout that system, because there's a lot of microbes living in the subbase. So that's why good SuDS designers like these systems. They don't provide biodiversity benefits, so let's face that one off, and they don't really provide amenity benefits unless you like hanging around in car parks. And if you do, that's your business. But they do provide brilliant source control, so they get rid of volumes of water, and they get rid of and they improve water quality. So that's why they're a useful tool to have in your belt. We always talk about putting permeable pavements on top of aggregate, because we know how that works. But we've come across more and more jobs lately where putting them on top of crates or tanks, putting them on top of permavoid, allows you to get much shallower systems. The void ratio in the aggregate that we specify is 33%. So for every 3 cubic meters of subbase, you've got 1 cubic meter of water. The void ratio in a permavoid tank's 97, 98%. So basically for every 3 cubic meters of crate, you've got very nearly 3 cubic meters of water storage. So that means you can get away with shallower systems. You can get away with, you don't have to, you don't necessarily have to go as deep. So again, it's about understanding what conditions you're up against. In city centres, for example, people don't want to dig down because there's services, there's basements, there's all sorts of reasons why you want to keep shallow systems. That's where using these sort of hybrid systems work really well. It's really simple to design a permeable pavement. I can make it sound really complicated, but I'll try not to. The key thing, again, and it's the point that we always make as suppliers and manufacturers, we love talking about it because we've got very little else to do with our time. So do phone us up, talk to us about it, ask us questions, direct your customers to come and talk to us, and we can help you through. We can give you some off-the-shelf designs, or we can do bespoke ones. But ultimately, just for your knowledge, just so you know how easy it is, you've got to do 2 different designs, 2 different calculations when you're designing a permeable pavement. First of all, you do a structural design to decide how deep it needs to be to cope with the load you think it's going to take. So, if you're doing a driveway, you're going to get a car on it, maybe 2 cars in it most days. If you're doing an access road, you're probably going to get at least 2 HGVs a week. So the deeper the subbase, the heavier the trafficking it'll take. Once you've done that calculation, you've come up with a calculation to say it needs to be this deep, you then do a separate hydraulic calculation, and that's how much water you need to store. So you need to think about what are the rainfall events? How much rainfall is it likely to take, given on the rainfall patterns of that area. You can get that from the Met Office. You also need to think, is it collecting water from anywhere else? So has it got any roof water going into that system? What a lot of housing developers are taking their roof water, putting it straight into the subbase, into a tank, or into the subbase of a permeable pavement. So then they're not discharging that into a combined sewer. When you've done your calculation for how much water you need to store, you'll then know how deep you need to go to store the volume of water. So you're going to have 2 depths, you go with the deepest. It's that straightforward. 2 calculations, structural and hydraulic, and then go with the deepest one. There's some more information that I forgot was going to come up. So we'll share the slides and you can read that later. One of the things that I've probably spent more of my time talking about than anything else over the past decade is myth busting about SuDS and about permeable paving in particular, because we've got a lot of experience about that element. A lot of people, they've been around we've been selling it as a business for more than 20 years, and permeable pavements first started about a quarter of a century ago. But if you talk to local authorities or talk to your customers, a lot of them are terrified of it because they think it's new technology, they don't want to be the first, and there be dragons. So first of all, hold the hand, look them in the eye and tell them they're safe, it's been done before, it's not going to be a problem. We've got loads of these myths. There's about a dozen different myths about permeable paving and SuDS. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I'll just go through a couple of the myths just to see, just to sort of put your minds at rest, because these are the 2 that you're going to hear more of than anything else. More than anything else, people always say, well, I'm not going to put that down because it'll get blocked up. Because people look down at the joints and they see sort of dirt and debris in the joints and they say, well, it's going to stop the water going down, isn't it? So I'm not going to put that down. I'll just put a channel or a gully in instead. I hear that off my neighbours because it won't surprise you to know that I've got a permeable paving on my driveway and all my neighbours look at me like I'm a lunatic because they go, oh, it'll just get blocked up. Look, you can see it's blocked. It's not going to work. First of all, a lot of research has been done into this. There was a study in 2006 by a guy called Senki Borgvort, and what he came up with was this idea that over the course of 10 years, it's going to get less and less permeable. The surface, because it does slow the rate at which water goes down. So if it starts when it's installed, it's got an infiltration rate of 100%. After 10 years, it hits just 10% of its initial filtration rate. So what that means is the water's getting into the subbase slower. The good news, though, is that 10% is still more than permeable enough to cope with any rainfall event you'll ever see in the UK. So the reality is that when you look down, you'll see this sort of dirt and debris in the joints. But all that is a tiny little crust about 5 mil thick that just sort of protects the rest of the system. So it does slow the rate at which the water makes it into the subbase, but it certainly doesn't stop it. And it doesn't sort of cause any problems. So the reality is that we know most of our systems get installed and never get maintained, and they're still working perfectly well. There's another study that's in Santander in northern Spain, where they're comparing different kinds of permeable surfaces, permeable resin, permeable tarmac, permeable concrete. I'm sure you can guess which one's performing the best. Otherwise, I wouldn't have brought it up. But ours is still working. Even in a sandy environment, ours is working really well. But still, people didn't believe us, so our paving engineer and I went out just between lockdowns in 2020, and we hung around 3 different car parks, and we performed American standard infiltration tests. You can find that on the internet if you've got nothing else to do this evening. But basically, you put a tube of water with a known volume of water in, you pour a known volume of water in and time the amount of time it takes for that water to soak down into the ground. We performed that test at 3 of our long installed car parks, and even the worst one, this is the this is the crucial bit to bear in mind. We got this data from the Met Office. So you can see there the infiltration rates of our oldest, most knackered, most unmaintained permeable pavements are still twice as permeable enough to cope with any rainfall event you'll ever find in the UK. So please, if anybody tells you that permeable paving gets blocked up, direct them to the research. We've got, you can find that on our website if you Google Marshall's SuDS and permeable paving. We've got a whole page full of sort of external research and external sort of guidance, but it's got the research that we've done ourselves as well, which demonstrate that that's not the case. The other one that I hear almost as frequently is that people are terrified that permeable paving won't take heavy loads. And it will. You've got to design it properly, you've got to install it properly, you've got to know what you're doing, but as long as you do that, that was the, do you remember the video that I showed earlier? That was the Portakabin depot on the Somerset Plains. Those cranes, when they're loaded with a Portakabin, weigh upwards of 210 tons. And that they've been driving over that surface day in, day out for 4 years when we took that photograph. It's performing perfectly well structurally, it's performing perfectly well hydraulically. So as long as it's been installed properly, as long as it's been designed properly, whatever's underneath it, whether it's a crate or whether it's aggregate or whether it's, you know, a tarmac DBM layer, they can take the heaviest loads on the road. There are about another 10 myths that I could talk you through, but I think you've been patient enough, so I won't subject you to that in the same way that I subject my wife to it. Just to give you a case study, this was one of the oldest permeable paving jobs that we'd installed. We went back to Martlesham near Ipswich, and they had a park and ride pavement. It's a brilliant example of joined up SuDS. The bus depot there in the middle, all of the grey water and all of the foul water is all managed on site. So there's absolutely no water discharge at all. All the rainwater is managed by the permeable pavement. The permeable pavement hasn't been, snipers, the permeable pavement hasn't been maintained, it hasn't been swept, it hasn't been cleaned, they've done nothing with it whatsoever. And if you look at it, there's moss throughout all the joints. We caught up with a guy that designed it, a guy called Simon Curl from Suffolk Council. Fascinating bloke. He was a bit of a pioneer all those years ago, and he came back, he was thrilled with it. And his comment was, he's going, doesn't it look nice with the moss in? It looks so much better, it looks kind of, and I think we'd struggle to sell that as a feature or benefit of permeable paving. But it certainly doesn't stop it working, because we did the test there and it's still more than permeable enough than it needs to be. There are trees all over it, really simple, really simply designed. He just built around the existing trees. There's foliage all around the edge, which is another thing that terrifies people, because they think as soon as the leaves fall off, then the leaves will clog the joints up. Absolutely no problems whatsoever. So yeah, again, for the real masochists among you, there's an 8-minute long interview with Simon Curl on that particular car park about how well that's working. And that, I think, is as much as we wanted to talk about, but we've actually hit time as well. We had 45 minutes. But yeah, if you've got any questions, then we're all ears.
It's also worth saying, actually, you can take permeable paving up to a tree pit. So in car parks, we do a lot of installations where there might be a Marshall's permeable paving up to a Polypipe tree pit. So again, that kind of all fits together, because the tree likes the water to come in from the permeable paving.
Because the point being that it'll come in, rather than coming across the surface, it's come through the sub-base, it's already been cleansed, so you've got that controlled flow of clean water, so it's not eroding the roots.
Could you explain exactly what a tree pit is?
Sorry.
Shall I go for it? Yeah, so there are kind of, I suppose for us in the UK, there's probably 3 ways of doing tree pits, I would say. So you can use a deep crated system. So you can direct the roots down to quite a low soil profile. And the idea that we manage trees, this is just for hard landscape, by the way. So if you're planting in a soft landscape, the infrastructure you can dispense with. But on most developments, trees will need some kind of structural support for hard. But basically, you can have a deep crate, because that's the way we've done it for, say, 20 years in the UK, where American companies have kind of brought over the deeper crated systems to manage the roots down. We at Polypipe, and I guess the European model, is more innovative, where we have a shallower cratered system like the permavoid just below that paved surface, so that what we can do is keep the roots where they like to be in the first 600 mil of soil, and we can also use the permavoid crates to irrigate and create a truly SuDS-enabled tree pit. So how you combine trees and water management is kind of a wider conversation beyond today, but that's why we like to use the permavoid or the rafted system. And then I guess the third way you can do it, which is often the kind of default cheap position, which local authorities are really pushing people away from now, is a kind of structural soil, which is basically a bag of gravel mixed with not very much decent organic matter that the tree roots will try to exploit and go through. But the reason engineers kind of used to use that quite a bit is because A, it's cheap, and B, you know, the gravel is a structural element for them, a bit like an aggregate. But what we found testing in the Netherlands and in the Middle East is that the roots get really seriously compromised by a structural soil because they hit the barrier and then they become less dense to get round them, so they don't anchor as well. So we find that there's a lot of tree failure through that. I hope that kind of expands a little bit.
It's ultimately, a tree pit's necessary in an urban space to allow the tree to thrive, because if you just dug a hole and plonked it in, the roots won't grow. And that's why you're seeing loads and loads of developments. You know, people put trees in and they all look very nice, and within a year, yeah, they're just not there because nobody's maintaining it. They've not been installed properly. So that's why in urban spaces a tree pit solution, some kind of tree pit solution, is usually required.
Well, there's a memorial stump where the tree once was.
I'm nicking that.
Can you explain the permavoid? We saw lots of information and I'm not massively technical on this, so can we just go around and look at a bit more product?
Yes, if Chris wants to. Oh, do you want to just jump back to the permavoid? See, there's a whole CPD we could do on permavoid. Now, I was trying to kind of not go all techie nerdy today at 4 in the afternoon. Oh, where? Oh, is there? Yeah, that's a reasonably good one. So, without doing sort of death by PowerPoint and being too boring today, permavoid started life in the Netherlands, and we acquired the license, and we've done a lot of modification, product development. We manufacture it in Horncastle from recycled polypropylene, and it basically creates a structural raft. It started life as a sub-base replacement, comes in 85 or 150 depths. And talk to the wonderful David Burgess after this, who is our engineering guru, who works with permavoid all the time, every day. But basically, we started to use it beyond the sub-base approach. So because when it was developed, we found that we could put it into linear assets and highways, and we could reduce the sort of loading requirements and the amount of cover that we needed for heavy trafficking. They started to branch out. So, for example, the permavoid 150 started to be used for tree pit applications. They then started to look at exploiting the capillary cones inside the system for the passive irrigation I mentioned, so that the water could then wick up, and how it could be used to support green assets rather than just be a sub-base replacement or used with permeable paving. So the use cases started to evolve over time. Now we've got something called permavoid squared, which is a kind of prefabricated panel system which we use on green and blue roofs, for example, and then we put a substrate on top, and that supports a biodiverse rooftop garden, for example. And it's a flexible modular system. There's a patented tie system that you can see on there. We do the full range of geotextiles and geomembranes. For example, you know, Chris was talking about creating sealed systems for the permeable paving. We need to do that sometimes for tree pits or swales or other features where we want to, you know, keep the water and pump it to another SuDS feature, or we don't want it just to infiltrate, or maybe we can't just let it infiltrate. So there's all these things that we can do, and we have a variety of treatment options that we also connect it to. And oftentimes we might design the permavoid so that we're using some of that maybe for source control, and then we might discharge that into our deeper polystorm crates so that they're working hand in glove, so to speak. So I hope that gives you a bit of of an understanding of how it works. But essentially, it's that modular, flexible, structural raft approach that enables us to do that. And also, as Chris was saying, the void ratio also helps us a great deal on rain garden projects, a bit like permeable paving. When we use permavoid in a rain garden, a lot of local authorities or developers want to put a rain garden in and show that they're doing SuDS on a site, but if they're just using aggregate and soil to store the water, they're not getting enough volume for it to eat into the stats that they need it to on the site. But if they put permavoid underneath to create that rain garden, they've got more water storage. So you can see how that's kind of snowballed into all these green applications. Does that help answer your question?
It partly does. It's probably me, a bit mixed ability class. But so it's holding in water, and then what's the dispersion rate of the water?
That,
Got that bit right? So it's holding in the water.
yeah.
And then the benefit is that it's like a little reservoir? Or?
Yeah. That's the huge benefit. But I mean, when you have a conversation with David, which I hope you will, you can talk about using it for either attenuation, detention, infiltration, because it's that flexible approach, or conveyance. So we're seeing actually quite a lot of time designers trying to use it for conveyance as well.
Did you wrap a membrane around it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right, so that, okay. So I was looking at that image thinking, that holds water, but there's loads of holes in it. So how's it doing?
You might put a textile around it, because if you want it to infiltrate, but effectively it's creating the void, creating the space to store loads of water in it, so it's out of the way of, so it's safely out of the way of your infrastructure.
And the store, you've got to put the membrane around it.
You might, or you might put a textile, what's the word?
Geotextile.
So you might have, so if a membrane's impermeable, we might put an impermeable membrane around to hold it in, and then put a pipe on so outflows, or you might put a porous textile around it, so you've got all that water stored, but it's infiltrating down at a rate.
The impermeable and direct the water out, or if you want the permavoid to just distribute the water there more permanently.
You're basically creating a structurally sound hole in the ground. It's that's effectively what it is. But yeah, ideally, if you had a massive space in your, if we were building a house here, we'd put a big attenuation pond on that lovely green field there, and then you'd have ducks in it, and you'd have trees in it, you'd have plants in it. It'd be wonderful. But we know that that's not the reality. So instead of having a pond there, you'd create some kind of hole in the ground. You put crates in it so you can drive cars over it, so it's structurally sound, and then the water will be stored in there until you've decided what you're going to do with it. But the crucial thing is that storage is there, so it's not creating a problem in a storm event. All right.
Does anybody else have any questions? Whilst pretending JARS doesn't exist for a few minutes.
I think that's it, actually.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much.